hard to
Imagine a
parse because you're
situation.
seeing
You're
GM and
driving your
Ford have
pickup
these
truck on the highway, everything is
strong
going as
earnings
usual,
reports,
and
huge
then,
moves in the stock.
suddenly, your engine just dies. Without warning. No problem signals. You lose all power, the steering becomes heavy, and the brakes barely respond. And this is not a horror movie scenario. This is a reality for almost 1 million General Motors car owners. In this video, we will talk about how the world's largest automaker has put the lives of its most loyal customers at risk. In February 2024, GM was forced to recall more than 800,000 vehicles, Silverado pickups, Tahoe and Suburban SUVs, and several more models. The reason? Engine problems that can lead to complete failure at high speed, right in the middle of the road. But that's not all. The most shocking part of this story is not that the company recalled the cars, but that it had known about the defects for years and, despite this, decided not to solve them, but only to postpone the problems until the owners were beyond warranty. You might be surprised, but according to the documents, GM knew that the engines in their pickups and SUVs had serious defects that could lead to catastrophic consequences. The company's engineers warned management about the risk of catastrophic breakdowns, but instead of fixing the problem, they decided to simply mask it with cheap and temporary solutions. It's not just a miscalculation, it's a whole strategy. A strategy in which the safety of customers and their trust were put on the back burner in order to avoid billions of dollars in replacement costs for defective engines. While millions of people trusted their cars and relied on their reliability, GM deliberately created cars that were supposed to break down immediately after the warranty expired. But these defects are not limited to the models that were included in the recall list. The technical problems hidden inside these machines may be much broader than we know, but the shocking revelations don't end there. We will reveal how GM uses special financial strategies in order to minimize its losses and shift costs to consumers. You will learn how the company has been reducing the quality of its cars for years, reducing the cost of parts and components in order to maintain profits and not cause a collapse in stock prices. This approach not only puts people's lives at risk, but it can also lead to the largest lawsuits in the history of the automotive industry. We will show you how this defect has affected entire industries, from construction companies to emergency services, for which the reliability of these vehicles is vital. And while all these companies are facing the consequences, GM continues to hide the truth, trying to minimize the scale of the problem. What should the owners of these cars do? What if your pickup truck can become a time bomb right on the road? In this video, we will tell you what every GM owner needs to do to protect themselves, their loved ones, and their money from possible disasters. Stay tuned, because what we reveal next will change your understanding of what really happens behind the scenes of the largest car companies. Your cars need to be reliable, especially when it comes to pickups that are used to transport heavy loads, as workhorses in construction, on farms, or to transport your family along the highway. But what if these cars, which should be your faithful companions, suddenly become a danger to your life? In 2024, General Motors, one of the largest automakers in the world, found itself at the center of one of the most shocking automotive scandals in recent decades. It all started with the fact that more than 800,000 pickup trucks and SUVs, including the Silverado, Sierra, Tahoe, and Suburban, were at risk due to serious engine defects. What is the essence of the problem? The answer is simple. These cars can just stop in the middle of the road without any warning. Imagine that you are driving on a highway, for example, in your Tahoe at a speed of 100 km/h, and suddenly, without any warning, the engine simply fails. With no overheating alarm or warning from the system and no flashing lights on the dashboard, it's just silence. Instead of moving forward, your pickup truck becomes stationary on the road, and a truck is rushing after you, and you need to somehow steer without losing your life. And this is not an isolated case. Dozens of owners of such cars have already faced this. Imagine what it's like to be in a situation where you're sure that your car, which you've spent tens of thousands of dollars on, will simply give up, and through no fault of your own, but because of a hidden manufacturing defect. This was the defect in the V8 engines installed on these models. These engines, which were positioned as the epitome of reliability, actually suffered from microscopic defects in critical components such as crankshafts and connecting rods. These defects were not visible to the eye, but they were deadly to engine operation. These parts could easily disrupt the normal operation of the lubricant, causing the metals to rub against each other, creating heat and breaking the mechanisms. This leads to an instantaneous engine failure without any warning. This was not just an accidental mistake, but a design error that GM engineers identified a few years ago. But here's the worst part. Despite the fact that the engineers knew about these defects, they were in no hurry to fix them. Documents obtained during the court proceedings show that the company's management decided not to fix the problem completely because it would have cost them billions of dollars. Instead, they decided to make sure that the problem only appeared after the warranty expired. This solution not only saved the company money, but also shifted all responsibility for engine repair and replacement to car owners. And so, instead of fixing defects at the factory and eliminating risks to consumers, GM chose a cheap solution. Use a special oil with a thicker viscosity and replace the caps in the engine to slow down the breakdown process before the warranty expires. But how safe was it? The answer is obvious: it was risky and potentially fatal. Even if you manage to avoid a breakdown during the warranty period, with the onset of 60,000 miles, when the warranty period ends, your car becomes an uncontrollable threat. And the owners, who have already expired the warranty, find themselves in the worst situation, with huge costs for repairing or replacing the engine. And GM, saving on real solutions, continued to make a profit. So, what is behind this decision? It's important to understand that this strategy of deliberately ignoring product durability and cutting costs is not unique to GM pickups and SUVs. This is a phenomenon that began to spread throughout the company's automotive industry when they started designing cars that were supposed to survive only the warranty period. This fundamentally changes everything we know about the reliability of cars. In the past, pickup truck owners could be sure that their cars would survive 200,000 miles or more, and even if some part failed, it would be easy to replace. Today, the situation has changed, and many buyers become victims of manipulations with the duration of the machine. The trust that has been built for decades is now crumbling. Families who have trusted their lives and money to these cars are shocked when it turns out that their cars are simply designed with an eye to warranty. When General Motors first announced the massive recall of its vehicles, affecting more than 800,000 vehicles, the reaction was overwhelming. It seemed like just a technical problem that needed a conventional solution. But as the details began to emerge, it became clear that this situation was much more complicated than just a standard review. What was hidden behind the company's official statements and how they reacted to criticism was at the center of one of the most violent scandals in the automotive industry. First of all, it's important to understand that GM didn't just recall cars for routine repairs. They did it only under pressure. The company's internal documents, which became available through court proceedings, show that GM's management had been aware of the engine problems for several years, but was in no hurry to resolve them because they believed it would not seriously damage their reputation in the short term. Most breakdowns were expected to occur after the standard 60,000-mile warranty expired, which meant that the responsibility for repairs had to fall on the shoulders of the owners. Why did the company ignore the obvious problems for so long? Internal reports obtained by journalists and lawyers claimed that the problem was recognized back in 2021, when the first massive engine failures began to manifest themselves on the roads. However, as investigations later showed, instead of fixing the root problems, GM management chose a cost-effective solution to limit itself to minimal changes that could delay breakdowns until the end of the warranty period. This decision was financially beneficial. It was expected that replacing the entire engine would cost the company tens of billions of dollars. But the cost of making minimal improvements, such as changing the oil to thicker and installing new engine covers, was less than $50 per vehicle. This is much cheaper and allowed the company to avoid unpleasant long-term expenses. But the owners of these cars could not and should not have faced such problems. Anyway, GM initially did everything possible to hide the scale of the situation. Car recalls in the United States are a huge process, and at first the company tried to minimize the number of affected models by limiting the recall to only those cars that are clearly susceptible to breakage. But it soon became clear that the problem affects many more cars. Data analysis showed that most of the V8 engines in the 2021-2024 models, including the popular Silverado pickups and Tahoe SUVs, had similar defects that began to fail after only a few tens of thousands of miles. This information became known only a few months later, when it became clear that engine defects cover not only a part of the cars, but the entire series of cars with this type of engine. When the public began to learn about the broader scale of the problem, GM seemed to be trying its best to avoid a full admission of guilt. Lawsuits filed against the company began to arrive from the first months of 2024, and they were based on the dissatisfaction of car owners who believed that the company not only deliberately left malfunctions without due attention, but also manipulated them in order to reduce its costs. Car recalls became inevitable, but they couldn't cover all the consequences. People began to go to court en masse, demanding compensation for the cost of replacing engines and damage insurance. At the same time, even despite GM's best efforts to minimize the damage, lawsuits continued to arrive, and this entailed even more serious financial consequences for the company. Incredibly, even after that, when the recall situation had already become public, GM continued to act with the expectation of minimizing losses. While many owners expected the company to offer them complete solutions, such as free engine replacement, in practice, the proposed repair measures proved insufficient and did not solve the underlying problem. Changing the oil and installing additional caps could not completely fix microscopic defects in the parts that cause catastrophic breakdowns. It was just a temporary band-aid that only postponed the problem to a later date. The intrigue is that GM's decision is not just a mistake. It was a conscious action aimed at saving money and minimizing responsibility to car owners. The company decided to shift the costs to end users, ignoring the long-term consequences for its reputation. The responsibility for problems with the safety and operation of cars now lies not with the manufacturer, but with the owners of the cars. When General Motors, one of the largest automakers in the world, faced a massive scandal due to engine defects in its pickups and SUVs, its financial position was in jeopardy. Initially, when the company announced the recall of more than 800,000 vehicles, no one expected that this would be the beginning of a real crisis for the company. It would seem that the recall of cars was supposed to be a step towards improving quality, but in fact, GM only confirmed its inability to fix the problem at the root, and did everything to avoid the real costs of eliminating defects. Instead of offering the owners complete solutions that would actually fix engine defects, the company took the path of minimizing damage, which, in the long run, could cost it much more. Initially, when the company faced criticism for the quality of its cars not meeting the stated standards, GM management decided to compromise by offering car owners a temporary solution, replacing the oil with thicker oil and installing new covers. This solution, although approved by some owners, did not solve the main problem: defects in the engines, which remained hidden, but inevitably led to serious breakdowns. This approach proved to be short-sighted, because instead of developing a complete solution and offering owners a new, safer engine design, GM chose to minimize its costs, jeopardizing the safety of its customers. The scariest thing about this situation is that GM already knew about the defects in the engines when it produced cars with these problems. Court documents obtained during the investigations revealed that back in 2021, the company's engineers were aware of potential breakdowns, but instead of taking steps to improve quality and solve the problem, GM management decided to let things take their course, expecting that most breakdowns would occur after the end of the warranty period. These actions were the result of the so-called warranty engineering strategy, in which the company develops products, expecting that their service life will be limited by the warranty, and most defects will appear after the end of this period. This approach allowed GM to significantly reduce the cost of production and maintenance of cars, but in the end led to completely opposite results. The whole situation was compounded by the fact that for several years, GM ignored the calls of engineers and specialists who warned management against using such strategies. The company tried to avoid high costs by postponing the elimination of defects until it was impossible to hide it. At the same time, GM's financial situation remained on edge, because in order to fix defects in the engines, the company would need to invest billions of dollars. It would have been too expensive to keep the profit, so the management chose a cheaper way. Changing the oil and installing new caps to prevent breakdowns, of course, cost the company much less than completely replacing the engines. But these measures did not solve the problem at the root. Every year, GM cut quality costs more and more, jeopardizing not only its reputation, but also the safety of its customers. This situation continued to deteriorate, and eventually large-scale lawsuits arose, which began to arrive from car owners whose cars were not subject to an official recall, but already faced the same problems as those on this list. This was a real blow for GM, because the engine problems turned out to be much wider than expected. It soon became clear that the engine defects affected not only the pickups and SUVs that were the subject of the recall, but also other models, including more expensive and popular versions that were previously considered reliable. And although the company tried to limit the scope of the recall by hiding information, the fact remains that defects affecting not only individual models, but also the entire GM engine range, affected a significant number of vehicles, which further aggravated the situation. But the biggest problem for the company was that its reputation, which it had relied on for decades, began to crumble. Drivers who believed in the quality of GM cars and bought them as reliable companions for work and family trips now felt cheated. They spent a lot of money entrusting their lives to cars that, as it turned out, were not built with proper quality. The whole situation was compounded by the fact that competitors began actively using GM's problems in their marketing campaigns. Ford and Toyota began to advertise their cars as more reliable and safer, attracting customers frustrated by problems with GM vehicles. The first recommendation for car owners is to immediately fix all breakdowns and contact service centers. It is important to keep all documents and receipts related to car repairs and maintenance. This could be crucial evidence in the case of a lawsuit against GM demanding a complete engine replacement or compensation for damage. If the car is still under warranty, you should insist on a complete repair and replacement of defective components, rather than limit yourself to temporary measures proposed by the company. GM is unlikely to offer owners a complete engine replacement, but legal experts advise demanding just that, since defects can lead to fatal consequences. Failure to fully fix the problem will mean that the company will continue to minimize its costs at the expense of the safety of its customers. For those whose cars are already out of warranty, there is another option. Consider extending the warranty. Of course, this solution will require additional costs, but it will provide some coverage against possible future breakdowns. In this case, it is also important to keep an eye on other possible legal steps, such as joining class action lawsuits against GM that could lead to compensation for car owners affected by defects. As early as 2024, there were reports that several thousand owners began to unite to file class actions to demand compensation and replacement of defective engines from GM, rather than superficial repair solutions. In addition, it is worth noting that GM continues to ignore the real problem, limiting itself to cosmetic changes such as oil and lid changes. These measures are absolutely insufficient to eliminate the root cause of engine failure. This approach is even more frustrating for owners who are trapped. If they continue to operate their cars, they risk getting into an emergency, but if they decide to sell the car, they will face a large loss in value. The problem is compounded by the fact that the cost of cars with defective engines has already dropped significantly. The GM car market has undergone a correction, and those who decide to sell their car will be forced to take huge losses. Some owners, in order to avoid further problems, began to look for alternatives by selling their cars to other companies, which also led to lower prices for GM cars. But most importantly, all these steps and consequences jeopardized the future of the company itself. GM faced a growing wave of discontent, and even competitors began to actively exploit this situation. Ford, Ram, and Toyota offered GM owners exclusive conditions for exchanging old cars for new ones, focusing on the reliability of their cars and their long-term operation. This forced GM to start adjusting its marketing strategy, focusing on restoring its lost reputation. However, only time will tell how effective these efforts will be. Given that many GM car owners have already questioned the safety and durability of these vehicles, it will be extremely difficult to regain trust. As for the legal consequences, GM risks facing multi-billion-dollar losses if lawsuits and class actions start to gain momentum. If the courts find the company's actions to be improper, it will have to pay large compensations to car owners. This, in turn, will deal a blow to the financial condition of the company, which is already experiencing difficulties due to falling sales and loss of reputation. The situation is aggravated by the fact that GM did not offer the owners adequate solutions and, in fact, left them alone with the problem. This has led to the fact that the company will have to pay not only for repairs and compensation, but also for restoring lost consumer confidence.